Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Short Term Rental Pacifier. This is the podcast where we discuss how to make your short term rental business profitable, fun, and as passive as you'd like it to be. I'm your host, Landon Smith, and today we're going to be diving into an essential topic for all property owners: choosing the best ID verification and damage insurance providers, or choosing not to use them at all. Like whether you're a seasoned host, you're just starting out, you're a property manager, ensuring the security of your property and the safety of your guests is obviously very important, but there's also a question like at what cost? So it's very challenging because you've got to pick the right provider, you've got to you've got to pick the right coverage, but you've also got to pick something that's going to work for your guests in your given market. And so more on that later, but side note, it honestly blows my mind that there is actual pushback from guests for a simple ID verification to stay at someone's house. Like I have to take a selfie, show my driver's license, give my credit card info before I can even think about getting the keys to my churro. So I do think Airbnb and Verbo need to make a much bigger step, take bigger steps to verify people who are about to stay in someone's house, but that may not sit well with their shareholders. So moving on. Halloween last year, I was watching people on my Ring camera in costumes show up at the front door of my home, looking into the front door. In about 15 minutes later, I was parked in my driveway, blocking the entrance as cars continued to pull up uh, to this party. That fortunately never really happened. So, for context, there was a verified Verbo guest that had booked for one night with one guest on a property that sleeps eight. And so the day that I had gotten a notification from it was actually 2 days before he was supposed to check in, I got a notification from our ID verification system that flagged the guest as a potential risk. So his card had also been declined. And at that point, I actually called him and questioned him about it. He ended up telling me that he booked under his parents' account. He had said he was 18 and just wanted to have a few people over. And I was like, dude, like we don't allow people under 25 for this particular property and for this reason. So I was like, you're gonna need to cancel your reservation. And you've already been misleading about this in regards to the guest count and booking under somebody else's account, obviously. So he agreed. He didn't fight it. And ended that conversation telling him I would cancel his reservation if he didn't. Well, shortly after that, I get an email, and this email says, "Just an FYI, there's a huge party planned at your house, and I don't think you know about it. There's going to be lots of alcohol and drugs there and underage drinking." And so I got that email and just talked to this guy. Well, there was also an attachment to this email, and there was a flyer that said the freaks come out at night and some other info, but part of that info was my address. So at that point, I called the guy back, and I was like, "Dude, like you got to cancel this. This is not cool. Like we don't allow this here." And I said, "You need to let everybody know that this party is not happening." Um, I went ahead and canceled this reservation because I didn't want to wait for him to do it. And I also said, if anybody steps on this property, it's going to be trespassing. So he agreed. He apologized again. He was really cool. He didn't fight back on any of this stuff. But Halloween night, I'm having a cocktail, and I start seeing ring notifications of people in costumes. And so I leave the party, and I head over to to my property, and I find a car idling in front of my house at the street. So I went up to the window. It's a couple sitting in the car with their child in a costume, and I was like, "Hey, can I help you?" And they were like, "Hey, we're just dropping off our kid at this party, but when we arrived, it didn't look like this was legit." I was like, "You're right, it's not legit. There's no party here." So they were super cool about it, shook their hands, they drove off. Well, then other cars started showing up as they were leaving, and so for the next hour, I was sitting there literally parked in the driveway, blocking cars and turning people away when they were showing up for this party. So, while these were probably just, harmless kids trying to have fun, I can appreciate that. That's not what our property is for, and I certainly don't want, uh, any part of underage drinking, drug use, whatever, at my property. So it may have ruined my Halloween plans a little bit or shifted them. It was actually pretty entertaining, but also obviously a really good lesson. So when we try to understand the problem is it's multifaceted, but the short-term rental market has obviously exploded in the past decade with Airbnb, Verbo, everything else. making it easier to rent out your property. But this growth comes with its own set of challenges. And part of the problem is the existing platforms. So, like Airbnb and Verbo, while they're popular, they do not have any kind of robust ID verification method. Their goal is literally to get as many guests on their platform, not to protect your property. And so that creates very lax verification methods like, put your email in and click a link that they email to you to confirm that you are legit. And I was like, are you serious? Like, that's all you're doing? Well, that obviously leads to the possibility of hosting individuals with malicious or prohibited intent that can result in property damage, theft, liability, and even the safety of other guests. Because you never know who's actually checking in. And do you want somebody that you don't know who they are actually getting the access information to your property? So the other issue with them is the claims process. Filing claims on Airbnb Verbo is incredibly tedious. It's time consuming, and I have plenty of firsthand experience dealing with the difficulties in getting claims approved and getting reimbursed through these platforms is also very time consuming and tedious. There's also direct bookings. Like if you even think of doing direct bookings, the only coverage you would have is your homeowner's insurance, which obviously is the wrong place to make claims for smaller damage items because you run the risk of your premiums going up in addition to the deductible likely not even or likely being more than the actual claim itself. So then there's a question like what is identity verification? How does it work? So essentially, it just ensures that guests are who they say they are. Like it's crucial to prevent fraud because if there's any kind of credit card issue that doesn't match, that opens up the door for chargebacks. And also, is it unreasonable just to want to know that the person staying at your property is who they say they are? I feel like that's very reasonable. But without the ID verification, you really do run the risk of hosting individuals like the one in my story that guest ID verification caught. There's also damage and liability insurance. So damage to an STR happens, and depending on the guest, it can result it can result in a bad review if you try. You have to be really careful on what you want to try to get, what you don't want to get. But it's also going back to the time consuming piece. So let's say you have a guest and they mess up your mini blinds or something like that, something minor. Maybe it's going to be a couple $100s. Well, you don't want to keep eating stuff like that. You also don't want to file a claim on your homeowner's insurance. You also want to be careful about going through Airbnb because first thing Airbnb is going to do is go to the guest and say, "Hey, you need to pay this." Well, they haven't left a review yet, so there's this kind of like this push and pull. Should I file this claim? Should I not file a claim? One of the benefits of having third-party damage protection is they don't. Most of them don't even go to the guest, so they're just going to. They're going to see the information that they require, like photos, kind of an itemized list of what's there, and then they will award that claim or give you that claim, that money, usually within 72 hours. So the right damage insurance not only provides a peace of mind, but also the financial protection. It's not like the big ticket stuff. It can be, but it's the little stuff. It's the broken window. It's there was an accident. It's the somebody threw up on the bed or something, or they got a bloody nose all over the really nice sheets. It's that kind of stuff that like really it's those nickel and dime things that will really add up. So, and then it's your time because the claims process again through Verbo and Airbnb is very tedious. So, what should you look for in ID verification provider? Because that's a very very important thing. Obviously, you want accuracy and reliability, and you want to make sure that anything a guest submits is secure, it's robust technology to one accurately verify the guest, but also to protect their data. Um, you've also got some of these companies have like biometric verification, which is really cool. They can do document scanning, they can do real time data checks, selfies, things like that. So there's a lot of different things out there, but I would say as important as that would be the actual user experience. The verification process should be very seamless. Like, you don't want them to have to do data entry. Like, I already entered this in. Why do I have to, fill it again? Kind of like when you go to a doctor's office and they make you fill out like 5 forms and write the same thing on every form. So you don't want it to be overly cumbersome for guests. And most hosts don't know that these kind of products exist. So it's not necessary. I'm sorry, most guests don't know that these kind of things actually exist because it's not a normal thing yet from a guest perspective. So most Airbnb guests aren't expecting this to happen. So if you're gonna do it, you better tell them prior to them booking, have it in your description that that's going to happen, and then make it very, very easy for them once they actually do book the property. So then you also have with that comes integration capability. So you want to make sure that whatever ID verification system you're going to use is easily going to integrate with your existing uh, property management software. Like we use Hostaway as our PMS, and it integrates perfectly with our insurance providers. So actually use a couple. Hit on that here in a second. You also want to make sure that there's compliance for where whatever your local, international, laws are. And you have to think about this. A lot of these companies are started overseas. Like one of the ones that we use is actually based in the UK. So you want to make sure that they're going to comply with your local, state, obviously federal laws. Um, Moving on from guest ID to the damage insurance provider, there's literally not there is no one size fits all, and there's a ton of options out here. One of the things you need to look for is the coverage options. You want to see like what type of comprehensive coverage it includes. Is it just accidental damage? Is it also theft? Is it liability? Um, More importantly, it's what you're comfortable with. So because there's all those options out there, you've got to pick one that's right for you, but also what's right for your guest. There's also options where you can pay for the insurance. You can have the guest pay for the insurance. You can actually build it into the nightly rate and have the guest pay without them knowing. There's a lot of different options there. So depending on what type of guest your property typically has booking, really is going to determine a lot of make a lot of these decisions for you. Again, there's not like one right way. There's multiple right ways to do this. The other thing that you really want to find out is what does their claims process look like? Do they contact the guest if there's a claim? What info is required? How quick do you turn it around? I think I mentioned earlier, our insurance provider turns claims around in 72 hours. My last claim with Airbnb for $150 worth of damage was about 3 months and literally over 20 emails back and forth. So you also have to remember insurance companies are for profit. So they don't make money approving claims. One of the best questions you can ask an insurance company, and this is across the board, like, what do you not cover? Because a lot of these insurance companies will give you this laundry list, kind of like auto warranties, right? Laundry list of things that are covered. And a lot of those things are really unlikely to happen. So it's like, what do you need for your property? Ask if that particular thing is covered. Like if you have, let's say you're in Colorado, it's really dry up there and you get a lot of bloody noses. And so you're always having to replace sheets. Well, the insurance provider we use in Texas may not work very well because they don't cover sheets. So we have another one that actually does in Colorado. So those things are really important. What do you need for your property? And then ask that, hey, what's not covered to make sure that there's something that's not covered that you're not thinking about. Then there's also costs. You can compare different providers, find a right plan for your money, but also for your property. So you don't want to overinsure, but you also want to underinsure, and you also want to consider the balance between like how much this premium is going to cost, and then weigh that with like your risk tolerance and then what you've seen previously with that property. The other thing that's really important with choosing a provider, and this is ID verification, this is also damage insurance, this is really across the board, anything but customer support. What does that look like? And my kind of way to vet that first is how am I being treated? Like, what's the service? What's the experience like before I've signed up, before I've given them any money? And if that experience isn't very good, then I'm going to go ahead and bet that once I start giving them money and I sign up and they already have me, it's probably not going to get better at that point. So, how they treat you, what the experience is like before you sign up is going to be a really good indicator on what customer service is going to look like down the road. So, what do we do? At Aaron, and I do this for my own properties. One thing I love about our company is everything that we try, I test out on my properties first. That way, when there are issues, and there are plenty of issues and roadblocks and things that I screw up, at least I screw up on my own properties and not our owners. So, but what do we do? And we use AutoHost and SuperHog for ID verification. It's simple, it's quick, it's cheap, but we only use them for certain properties that are higher end. And I'll get into that more on that shortly. For damage insurance, we use Insuragast and SuperHog, and it really depends on the property. So for my lower nightly rate properties, I use Insuragast, and for my higher nightly rate properties, I use SuperHog. And, I get asked sometimes, like, why do you use multiple providers and not only, do ID verification on some properties, but not do them on others? And, at the time of my story, as like I was telling you earlier, we were just using Superhog for ID verification and damage insurance. Like, I think I said this as well. They're based out of UK, and I still think they're one of the best companies out there in terms of ID verification, and insurance. It's incredible. Uh, Part of the problem is this difference in cultures. As an example, Superhog, one, the name I think is absolutely terrible, at least for the states. I think it works well for over there, but people are like, "What is Superhog?" So that's number one. That was an issue. The other thing is, like, people would go through there and start filling out their information. And, yeah, like, "What's your home address or your mailing address?" And instead of saying city, it would say town. And people are so hyper alert, and they should be, to things like fraud, scams, and stuff like that. They're getting this. They're already told by Airbnb, "Don't pay any money outside of Airbnb, or we can't protect you." So they're already, like, on high alert. When they see something even as small as town, it throws a red flag. It's kind of like when you see an email from somebody that says, "Kindly do this," your first thought is like, "Okay, well, this is probably not a Native American, or sorry, Native English speaker. There's nothing wrong with that at all." But it's a flag. It's something to be, it catches your attention. I think that's what's happening with Superhawk. So when we started we started to see this pattern where guest booking with some of the, like, the lower nightly rate properties were pushing back incredibly hard on ID verification and damage insurance. Like, even to the point where some were canceling reservations because they were so skeptical about this. It became an, like, utter internal nightmare because we were literally getting bombarded with questions every single day, every single booking from guests on these properties, generally speaking, that had the lower nightly rates. And we had the messaging crystal clear in Airbnb, in Verbo, everywhere, to set the right expectations. And then we even added reasons. Like, after I had that issue on my property, we added reasons, like, somebody tried to throw a property, they booked into their parents' account. They were gonna have this big, this rave bender drug thing, whatever. It's like, this is why we do it, and they still would push back on that. It's crazy. And so because of that, like, it got to the point where I was like, this isn't worth it. Like, if we're gonna start losing revenue, and some of the people's questions were legit, like, "Hey, what's Superhawk gonna do with our information?" It's like, "I don't know. I haven't read their private policy." But it was to the point where we were starting to lose reservations. It's like, that can't happen either. And so it just wasn't worth it. So now we have it as an option if we need it based on the guest history. And that's actually worked really well. And strangely enough, there was little to no pushback on the higher end properties even after we made some of these shifts. And I think the main reason is because say a $50 damage waiver is much more significant on a property booking at 150 a night versus one booking at 600 a night. So we use Superhog for guest ID verification, higher end properties, and have it as an option when we need it on the lower nightly rate properties where guests don't have any history. And for insurance, again, Superhog on higher nightly rate properties, and insure a guest on the lower nightly rate properties. And I know that may sound like super complicated, and in some ways it is, but once it's set up, it's about 95% fully automated. Like, we have each one of these connected to our PMS, our virtual assistants check the guest history for each booking, and based on that criteria, determine whether or not to put the ID check as a requirement. We're very, very clear about that in our listings, and it's very simple. Like, if you've gotten a 5-star review from another host, it's good enough for us. If you've never booked on Airbnb or Verbo, or it's a direct booking that's not with a repeat guest, the ID check is required, period. So I'll have to say much of this is about prevention. So, like, if you're clear in Airbnb and your listings, like Verbo, all of them, that you have a Ring camera at the front door. You're not gonna have it you're not gonna allow any parties, large gatherings, and they know you can see the front door with that Ring camera. Uh, if you lay those policies out really clearly, much of the issues can be avoided. But even doing all that, I mean, I still had that off chance guest that, having these items in place really did save me a ton of potential time. money and liability. So I think in the end, it's just one of those things. You've got to make the right decision for you based on your property. If you're a property manager, you got to make the right decision for your owners. There's that delicate balance between, protection, but then also making sure that like the guest experience uh, is also maintained and they're happy and it's seamless and it's a good experience for them. So that's what we do. I'd love to hear any stories or questions um, from anybody else. We're always learning, and it's crazy how many good things we've been able to learn from hearing other people's stories. But if you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, leave a review. If you have questions or suggestions for future episodes, please reach out to us on our website at www.airinn.life. That's AIRINN.LIFE. And I hope you have a great day, and I hope this was helpful. Thank you.